Rajesh, what is the impact of geographical locations in the concept of RIAS? Are there specific asset classes that work best in different parts of the world?
5 years back, we got out of from the metro city of Mumbai and Chennai, and we got into the outskirts. Create asset classes for people where it is convenient to buy today at economical price point. We started developing land and villas where appreciation happens because you are within 100 kilometers of a powerful and mega city like Mumbai. And city like Mumbai always grows at the rate of 10 kilometers per year, thanks to the government infrastructure outreaching to more distant places. And if you can build it within the reach of the local railway train in Mumbai, then that asset becomes very valuable. We are trying to educate people that when you invest today in the outskirts where the infrastructure when you are buying is bad, but as the infrastructure improves, the appreciation happens as more and more people want to go a little away from the city so that they can afford to buy an asset. We are the only villa developers which come within the 100 kilometers range of a city like Mumbai, developing villas. We educate them how to leverage bank loans, where the bank is interested only in the interest, whereas the appreciation is your personal gain. These kind of asset classes help the families for a 20% down payment, earn almost 10 times the return of the down payment over a period of 10, 15 to 20 years. A point of time will come in their asset owning tenure where the returns of revenues will surpass the EMI that the customers are paying. So we are actually educating the people on how a real estate asset can become a windfall capital gain asset for them in the long run. It is between 5 to 20 years. And that's what we are doing in asset class. And the response has been phenomenal because there are very few villa developers on the outskirts of a city like Mumbai or Chennai or Madurai or Coimbatore. So that's what we are trying to leverage. And it's a win-win situation where the buyer wins, the seller wins, as well as the person who comes to operate the community as a resort property, like Trip Villas, they also win. So, and the asset class, when you enter the purchase time, that is the buying period, which is today, it's very interesting. And surprisingly, in the pandemic, we have seen an amazing surge in the amount of inquiries and the amount of transactions that are happening for low density gated communities, villa developments with land ownership.
So one of the topics that you touched upon, which I found really interesting, is involving OpCos in the short-term rental business, which will bring a lot of yield over a period of time. Next question is directed towards you, Captain. We understand that although data centers are key in the age of Internet of Everything, we know that it is a little difficult to set up, maintain, and manage. Can you please throw some light on the challenges involved in terms of investments and maintenance of data storage assets and the opportunities to look out for in the future as a service provider in this space?
I think 2020 has really changed our entire perception of the data centers. So much so that I would say that data centers have already become India's backstage soldiers. Right? I mean, during the lockdown, the impact of the lockdown was sort of muted to a large extent, though the captive centers run by large companies supporting IT, ITES, BFSI, social media, or e-commerce companies was impacted because of the physical restrictions. I think the data centers did us proud, especially the colo centers that are hosting all these essential services. It's become an essential service, indispensable essential service, so to speak. With homes becoming the nucleus or the center for work, education, recreation, etc., and are sort of imbibing the digital economy to a large extent in the country, data centers are really become extremely important as an asset class for not just commercial offices, but also outside, which has typically been the domain of commercial office industry, but it has also spread out into all these verticals that I talked about. Now, the second aspect that has also been playing up, as you also realize, is that the data protection laws have also had a huge impact in the country in terms of the data centers and the need for them and the regulations which abide localization of data. Now that has hugely impacted the shift from captive centers to colos. Then again, in the future, with what we are seeing with one large industrial house in the country, also trying to roll out the 5G services and the edge computing and Internet of Things, it will drive the next phase of data centers in the country for sure.
Actually, I have an interesting anecdote around this. I was talking to one of the biggest data center operators in Singapore who has asked not to be named here. And the CEO is actually telling me that running a data center is not typically like running any other asset class because you're not running one asset class. What you are effectively doing is running a data center, a power plant, and a cooling center all by itself, with the government giving you support for 2 out of 3 in entirety, and you have to figure out what you're doing with the other aspect. And a lot of data centers have their own power sources and cooling centers, right? So at the end of the day, I completely understand that the PropCo needs to invest a lot initially to, maybe gain or maybe break even in over 3 to 4 years. But the belief is that, the yield beyond that is extremely high.
Absolutely.
Moving on, we're going to talk about one of the biggest buzzwords in the market today, which is coal. The question that we put forward is, with multiple operators fighting to grab a piece of the pie and a fair bit of consolidation in the sector, Nidhi, we're going to come to you. Where do you see this market moving in the near future? And what excites you the most about operating in this space?
Real estate and rental have existed for centuries, right? Co-living is a very sexy word. It's a new word, but it's existed traditionally for very long, right? I think what has changed is that there was a rental arbitrage all along. Now there is a service arbitrage overlay on top of it, right? I think hotels were the first ones to actually embark on that journey. They took a piece of real estate, added the service overlay, and that was RIAS in its first form, right? And I think when I look at co-living or student housing or their entire spectrum, I think it's effectively hospitality-like flexible services that you're adding, and it's a value add effectively, right? So what you're telling people now is that the real estate is definitely the underlying asset, but the ownership of that asset is no longer important, right? The access to the asset is important. The services that come along with it are important. And I think that's what real estate has become, is a user experience, right? So to your point, yes, there is a complete paradigm shift in the way we are perceiving real estate. With multiple operators coming, I think it's fabulous, because currently the co-living market, which is the PG market, is 90% is still running on a rental arbitrage, but not a service arbitrage, right? And as we're going forward, there is definitely room for more and more players to come in. The market is massive, right? I mean, it's a over $20 billion market today, and only under 5% is penetrated by organized players across all spectrums: senior living, co-living, student living, right? Co-living has definitely become a lot of as you said, a buzzword now, right? Largely because the service overlay on top of that, the kind of yield that the asset owner is making ultimately makes this a massively investable asset class now, right? And sustainable, long-term, steady annuity businesses, right? So in my mind, I think now with more and more competition coming, and post-COVID actually, I feel it will be great for the organized space, because people will actually put a value to personal space, hygiene, better conditions, better quality and service, right? Ultimately, the RIAS in co-living is, everything being taken care of, hassle-free living, flexible, easy on the pocket. But I think an overarching thing of making sure that, it's your basic hygiene and your things are taken care of effectively, right? And I think that we underestimate how isolated people are in the country. You move to a new city, you don't know anyone there. I think one underestimates the need for, companionship. So to some extent, I wouldn't say this solves the problem completely, but I think to some extent, when you walk into a co-living facility where people like-minded, similar walks of life, it just makes life a lot easier. So, I think competition is great. It's helping us all evolve our products better. Ultimately, it will be about the user experience. All of us have to keep evolving. COVID has made us all kind of work on our products and make it suited to the new world. But I think there's a long way to go, because the market is massive. And the penetration right now is, like I said, under 5%.
Some of the most interesting points that I found here is how you articulated that initially co-living was set up, for basic hygiene factors, where people were evolving from PGs to, co-living setups. And today it's more about community building, and we find that to be a lot more attractive. We actually have a separate panel just to discuss, how communities are being built. Another asset class that has been ignored for far too long and has not been really evolving as a managed sector is the senior living spaces. Shambhi, is there anything any change that you can see in customer ethos that can be observed globally, and are the unit economics in this space lucrative enough to see significant changes in the near future?
Balaji, since we are on the discussion for RIAS, let me just add something over here from the perspective of services in real estate. Yes, it looks like it's a new model of services in real estate, but I feel what really it is about acknowledgement and realization of this concept that has recently surfaced. It's interesting to see how people have been applying it in real estate. We do understand that people are not buying into products, but what they are investing is in the experience across the products and services. this entire service-driven model and the emergence of the alternative classes has remarkably changed the way we are working, living, or staying today, right? Now, moving on to senior living. Before I explain to you about the way it can become a profitable segment, let me just give you some numbers right now.
Right.
As per UN, the number of seniors have moved on from 382 million in 1980 to 962 million in 2017, and we are going to see an upward movement of this to 2.1 billion by 2050. As of today, we have almost 100 plus million seniors living in this country, and 20 million out of these are living alone. As far as the way people are approaching or accepting this entire idea of senior living, let me tell you that the old ecosystem of joint families have really disintegrated. Till recent past, socially and culturally, it was not accepted that we put our seniors into old age homes, or they can stay away from our homes. It was a taboo. People were skeptic about it. However, today we have a huge set of seniors who are very educated, and they are very well equipped to take decisions post-retirement. This idea of increasing income levels or growing numbers of seniors has definitely given a rise for the need of this kind of a real asset class, where people can actually take a decision that they want to invest in facilities and services which will take care of their physical, medical, or psychological needs going forward. In India today, if we really have to see, the need of senior citizen has not been really identified and understood at an industry level very fairly. But there is a great potential for growth of this sector in our country through developers, service providers, healthcare players, and operators, where they can cater a very specific solution for Indian segment based on the learnings that we can leverage from the West. We currently have not more than 55 to say 60 facilities by say 12 to 13 organized players. 60% of this is in tier 2 and only 40% in tier 1. Also, out of these facilities, you will see only 60% of them are concentrated in south, while balance are in west and in northern region. Clearly, we can really see that there is a huge untapped market, and the potential to grow this segment is huge. In couple of decades, we can see that this segment or this sector can even contribute to the economic growth of the country. With the need of reform, education, and the support, we can definitely see that these segments are going to grow. Let's say there is a need for social acceptance that needs to be built, right? People have to start understanding, learning more about these sectors and why it is needed in this country. Very important point that I would like to make here is about affordability. Clearly, seniors do want to live independently in their post-retirement life. However, the huge concern today for them is the diminishing return on their post-retirement finances that they have. We are speaking about greater life expectancy, but at the same time, we are living in the age where 60 is the retirement age. So we need a concrete plan with the help of authorities, government bodies, and institutes, where we work towards a financial independence and continued earning of the senior people. Maybe there can be a ministry of care that can be set up at a central and a state level, where they continuously work focused to put certain measures and programs for this industry. And then financial institute needs to recognize this sector as well. There is a gamut of things that needs to be put in together to make sure that we push this industry or this particular sector ahead. Profitability, huge. There are two models that we can talk about right now. One is the sale and the lease model. And in both these models, there is a way in which the developer, healthcare, or facility provider and operators can really earn is right from the rent, if it's a lease model. Then from the deposit, they can earn interest. Then there is a service operator charges. If it's a sale model, you are going to earn revenue from the sale of the product. Then you're also earning from maintenance charges of the units and the apartments. Plus, there are additional charges that a senior resident needs to pay for other supports, be it laundry, special meals, the caretaker, so on and so forth. Also, what we need to remember that in a lease model, the capital value appreciates for your assets over a period of time. So basically, it's a great win-win situation for both, where a resident gets a hassle-free living, and the developer or the service provider also gets to earn nicely on this entire model. There have been claims and discussions where, if managed properly, this kind of facilities can actually make upward of 30 to 35% profits as well. And it really depends on the geography, demographics, and the asset proposition that you will have to put together.
With the increase in life expectancy and the sort of respect that people have towards their elders today and mentors of yesteryear, we truly believe that an integration of healthcare services and specialized services to the opcos, and an integration or some support provided by government entities to the propcos can really bring about change here. Back to Captain on this one. I know this is going to be a lot to digest, but here it goes. So we have self-storage solutions, urban warehousing, and managed parking spaces. And these segments have been championed throughout the decade in developed countries, but have never seen an expansive growth in the majority of Asian countries. What are some of the challenges that are to be addressed in terms of availability of resources and management techniques to provide the necessary nudge in these geographies?
Right. Again, just like data center, I think you've chosen the right topics for me. The warehousing and logistics sector also is on a high, right, as we have seen. And various factors have contributed to the same, starting with the GST, reduction in corporate tax, changes in the FDI, infrastructure push from a banking perspective, commercial loans perspective, the Make in India concept, the ease of doing business getting better for India on the ranking side. And finally, success of some of the commercial office real estate REITs, also looking into the other sectors. And warehousing, I'm sure, is going to follow pretty soon. Now, I think what is happening is, especially in the impact due to the COVID era, a lot of the push for e-commerce companies for faster turnaround times, as well as to keeping localized solutions for their warehousing rather than looking at their fulfillment centers or delivery centers or sort centers, as some of the companies refer to. This market is pretty huge. And I think it's a huge play in terms of market share with newer entrants on different segments, not just on the electronic side, which we've been using, but also on food, delivery, groceries, and so many other aspects that are adding up to the food chain. I think what is happening at an organized level, we are making huge strides, right, in terms of an understanding of what the warehousing needs are, bifurcating within different kinds of qualities in which these have to be constructed, and great, operators in the country, rather starting with developers as well as 3PL providers, are making huge strides on this. You do see some, different innovations that are happening in terms of bringing the warehouses closer to places of deliveries. Again, we are run like the US around pin codes. The smaller delivery centers are getting closer to the large residential hubs. If you have to have a license to do an operations for a warehousing, in Karnataka, if you have a commercial license, you have a land use commercial, you could also dispense of warehousing solutions from there. Now, to make it organized and to make it effective, the sizes that we need to work on are sort of a challenge in terms of availability of land, and availability of such solutions that can be built in for a variety of reasons. One is just, some industry verticals would like to do it between 5,000 to 10,000 square feet, but those are very, very far and few between, and those do not require too much of, long-term thinking. It could be a short-lived, off-the-shelf solution, both from the landlords as well as the operators. But where we are seeing traction, and I think we have way to go, is within city limits, if I should call that, the requirement of at least 3 to 4 acres of space to create sizable solutions. Warehouses are not multi-storied unless you're looking at a vertical warehouse, which is, which could be a proper RCC structure. But if you're looking at warehousing kind of a solution, ground plus one is probably at the max that you would go to. Then there are aspects of how much you would be able to deliver in terms of usable space. Mezzanine does get added up, but most of the delivery centers and in-city centers don't really require mezzanine. So they would purely be a storage solution. Now, in terms of that, for the landlord side or the developer side, the dilemma is, the payback periods would not come handy around between 7 to 8 years. And then adequate parking place with the residentials already sort of overburdened with lack of parking availability for the general public does cause some grief, in the on this segment. Like Shambhavi said, there are certain aspects that need to be changed at a thought leadership level. I think there is some discussions and some policies that need to come out in terms of regulating this space also. We are absolutely well regulated in the large spaces of fulfillment centers and all that, but in the in-city centers, this is a struggle. Now, in terms of self-storage solutions, right, which is a very, very in thing in much of the developed world, you could do that at a drop of a hat. We are not yet there, right? I mean, I think the rental proposition that you have for a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom to keep versus to move out and then reestablish, there are certain dilemmas. Again, it's an evolution curve. I think we are going through that process right now. What it does offer is there are multiple 3PL players, right? Third-party logistics providers who do this for many large manufacturers who take space in a volume-based kind of a level. It could be a record management company which could be setting out certain spaces which could be used for this, for the personal records, for personal storage. It's not very common right now, but I think from an infrastructure perspective, the infrastructure exists and it can become a good income stream for some of the large players or organized players and who have this kind of not just the setup, but also the operability of being able to manage this. So there is some work to be done on that. But I guess we are, the necessity is it drives a lot of innovative aspects in our lives. And we have seen this in the last 7 to 8 months already. So I'm sure we will drive towards that. And these couple of innovative aspects will pop up for sure.
And I think the current situation is given that nudge that we necessarily needed in India for self-storage spaces. This one is directed to you, Rajesh. With an increase in yield from upcoming asset classes, is there a higher risk in investing in emerging asset classes? And is there any way to ensure that this investment is secure with the involvement of new age companies?
Surprisingly, now what's going to be happening because of the current scenarios, the world is now moving towards horizontal development rather than vertical development. The density of people living in a locality will matter a lot on their health concerns in the near future. I'm not talking only about the current pandemic, but even in the future, people will want to be comfortable in low density zones. The craze for the vertical developments has now eased out, and the government also wants to have horizontal developments in the country, especially in India also. The government is building infrastructure on a rapid pace, especially railway train stations and highways, which is going to connect 2-tier, 3-tier cities closer to the metro cities like Mumbai. Development going from the center of the city outwards is what is going to be the trend. What the developed countries have shown in the past couple of decades is what is going to be happening to India again. What is critically important is the merger between the developer, the property operator, and the customer. Now, this is going to be in sync together. And we have always realized that the safest investment that people have been exposed to in this country is real estate. So property is a very safe asset to buy. Bank leveraging is a lot of intelligent people are leveraging banks to create assets which appreciate very fast. Now, the key to understand is where do we invest this money in? The asset location selection is critically important. Then the quality of the property is very important. The facilities of that property is very important. And the infrastructure development zone from the angle of the government is critically important. What appreciates the value of the asset is the infrastructure development, because with infrastructure, your location becomes more closer to the happening part of the city. The center parts of the city have seen stagnancy, or prices have been corrected to a great extent. Right. But real estate is no more going to be an FSI game in India. That's what I mean by saying horizontal development. So it is going to be reverse migration of opportunities. Right. The whole rural part of India was chasing the metro cities, but now the people of the metro cities will start chasing the 2-tier and 3-tier cities, because the opportunities are going to be there. Government is also incentivizing any form of doing business in those areas of the country. So I feel a lot of new decisions are taking place, a lot of new opportunities are coming up, and people need to leverage on that. Every city grew in the last 50 years. Now in the next 50 years, the outskirts of the city is going to grow in the same manner. the highest revenue that people can earn during their lifetime is the appreciation that a real estate asset ownership gives you. So nobody can shortcut on that. Everybody will look at it as a opportunity for the near future and far-fetched future. So I feel asset class is the safest to invest. And now with operators coming in for senior living, student living, or for co-living, your assets are going to become more remunerative. These are all very efficient methods of making your assets more remunerative, which can ease off the repayment pressure on the asset buyer. So I think these are new times. This is the new world order. And I'm sure real estate is going to be the backbone for wealth creation for each and every family in the country.
We would have seen a similar shift in customer ethos when it comes to buying properties in the GCC region, where they have micro cities in Dubai and even in Europe and Italy, where they had set up a few smart cities. The next question is to Nidhi on student housing. Student housing works on a slightly different operational model as compared to generic co-living. Can you throw some light on the differences in terms of setup and the financial impact? And also, how does it measure up in terms of buyer expectations when it comes to the yield from the property?
So I always say student living is hospitality on steroids, right? You are not only, you don't have one client, which is the student, you have two very involved parents typically, and potentially a college as well, right? So you have to kind of, create your product so it suits and everyone's requirements, right? For a student, the most important is Wi-Fi, right? God forbid there is no Wi-Fi in the building one day, hell will break loose, right? But for the parents, it's very important to ensure security is of key importance. And for the college, obviously, just overall security and the experience of the child. So one has to ensure that your product is effectively taking care of all those aspects. As far as student housing and co-living go, I think the difference is that with student housing, you have to overlay the entire service experience with very, very strong SOPs, right? So you're taking care of kids who've come out of home for the first time, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, right? So right from attendance checks to ensuring that they are safe, want to give them the freedom, but and not make it feel like a jail, but also you're answerable to the parents at some level, right? So ensuring you strike the right balance on, their security, right? So that becomes your responsibility implicit. On top of that, obviously, food becomes a very, very critical thing, right? These kids are eating 365 days, 3 meals a day, and obviously, they're used to eating at home, but they would not complain. But, again, if one meal goes wrong, again, hell breaks loose, right? So I think food becomes an integral part of the offering. Now, unlike working professionals who typically end up using the space to, stay, just come back from work and that's it, right? Students end up spending a lot of time in the campus itself. So that would, say the study rooms, the common rooms, the gym, their rooms itself, right? When we design our student housing spaces, we ensure the rooms are the most comfortable, right? Because we realized initially these kids like to hang out in the common spaces, but once they've made friends, they'll either spend time outside or in their rooms. They need light, fresh air, need enough space to study, the study tables, the bed should have a lot of storage. And also the longevity of your client is much longer than a co-living space, right? So typically my student is staying with me for 3 years, as opposed to a co-living business where your churn could be anywhere between 3 to 6 months, right? So from that perspective, you have to ensure that the student is comfortable enough, there's enough storage space, there's enough space to move around. So you can't compromise on certain elements of the structure of the place itself. From a return perspective, I think, with the way we look at student housing is, your parent is the ultimate person who's paying. So we actually find student housing a lot more stable from a return perspective, because one, your student is staying with you for 3 years, right? So your customer acquisition cost on a unit dwindles quite quickly, right? So you've got your student in one and you've got the student locked in for 3 years. Secondly, this is a very big word of mouth sort of an advertisement for us, right? Once a kid comes in, they will get their friends in. So after a year one, we don't really have to spend much money or efforts on marketing the properties, right? Once they're off ground, they kind of fulfill themselves on their own with word of mouth. Because your parents are ultimately paying, right? There is more stability in the payout. You can upsell a lot to these students. Your parents are paying for it ultimately, right? So I think from that perspective, we feel that the sustainability of this business, the annuity and the cash flows are a lot more robust than a co-living business where people are constantly churning, and the differentiation in the product for the price point that is typically on offer at the market is very difficult to do. The current co-living market that actually exists is around the 7 to 15,000 rupee range, right? And typically this is somebody who's earning anywhere between 30 to 50,000 rupees, right? You can't take 25, 30, 40% of their income towards housing, right? Whereas on students, your typical average ticket size is much higher because parents are willing to pay for the security, parents are willing to pay for that extra comfort, having a warden they can trust. So all those aspects actually make a huge difference, and you can charge the premium for that.
The price of the property typically is a lot lower as universities are slightly farther away from, the heart of the city, and the yield is, much more, and, the customer acquisition costs are definitely lower. And I think you've covered all of this. Thank you. So the last question for our panel here is to Shambhavi, is that with the advent of, Internet of Things and smart everything, a significant number of assets have now been classified as smart homes and smart offices. And Shambhavi, as a PropCo creator and management team, is it turning out to be a formidable challenge? And how did this prove to be beneficial for operators and consequently the end customer?
See, in the mid segment, to quickly tell you, today we have almost 31% of population which is living in urban areas, and this is only going to go up to 60% by 2050. What are we looking at? Almost 38 million homes which are going to be needed by 2030, and India being one of the most populous nation by 2030. If we are talking about technology in this housing, it's not only about how smart these homes are, but it has to address everything, right from the way it is being constructed, the technology used in construction, or the technology is being used within the community to make the living better for the residences, right? We are talking about building homes which are smarter or better configurations, which are affordable, which has space efficiency planned very beautifully. Products which have innovation integrated within the complexes, and the beautiful overlay of technology which enhances the living standard of the residents over there. A very important aspect today, what we have realized is, since the COVID has come into play, people are looking for homes. They do want a comfort and security where the families can live within the integrated communities, where everything that they are looking for is taken care of. Now, this is something that has not come to us at Embassy as a surprise, because we have already put our thoughts together and planned on these products right since 2018 when we launched Embassy Edge at Embassy Springs, which is Bangalore's one of the largest gated communities or a township project that we have put together.
Right.
I completely agree to what Rajesh mentioned of the fact that communities going ahead are also going to look at low density projects, sustainable projects, and for a gated communities. The entire concept of 15-minute city is what people are going to look at, with an overlay of a beautiful technology taking care of everyday aspect of their life. Now, let's look at technology within senior living for that matter. It will definitely enhance the business outcomes and improve the residential care for sure. Be it the wearable bands or motion sensors or manage lightings of the rooms. This data collection technology is definitely going to improve the care that providers are going to give to the residents within their facilities. It's not merely about the say physical item, it's an entire overlay of technology, how the data is being collected, analyzed, and then conclusion drawn from the data points. Not just know what these residents or seniors are doing, but from this we need to be able to predict what they will do and tailor our care to ensure that we are giving them the much needed services from this predicted behavior. So you can look at wearable technologies, which is resident monitoring systems, which takes care of looking after their health and sleep patterns. And when we speak of IoT, we are looking at how it enables them to control the entire environment. So one is the integration of the wearable devices a resident is wearing on self, and the integration of the same with the technology that is being built within the complex or within the resident unit in which they stay. Managing the light sensors, air conditionings, heaters, or even interact with the AI personal assistants. Then we have telemedicines. So wearables and IoTs take care of the safety and happiness of the residents, where telemedicine is going to look into the health, right from video conferencing for health education, remote modeling of residences, or even teleconsultation. And then we are talking about voice activation, which is a common thread across IoT, be it wearable or telemedicines. And this is everything to do with managing the devices to the human voices, which empowers their residents. And then there is a security through CCTV cameras, video, phone doors, so on and so forth. But it's not just technology that in isolation that we can really speak about it. The challenges about integrating this technology is always going to be the same, even in senior living. It's about adaptation and the engagement that we build through it. The entire experience has to be seamless. Residents and the caretaker needs to be interested in wanting to engage with this technology with much simplicity. Right? It's called interoperability as a concept. One should not think that, okay, is this technology going to help me get the next resident, or my residents going to move out because they are feeling difficult to handle this entire technology.
Right.
And the buyers who move into these spaces definitely need to ask that, say that, hey, I'm going to move into this this entire facility that you have built together because the way you have integrated technology and the way you are taking care of the residents, making our lives very simple and safe for us to stay.
Right. Very well articulated, Shambhi. Thank you so much. We're just going to say a quick goodbye to Rajesh, who I believe is on another panel at 1:15.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the audience. Thank you so much for the panelists. Got to learn a lot from your sharings. Have a God bless day. Thank you so much. Pleasure knowing all of you.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Thank you, Balaji. Thank you. Thank you to HouseMonk.
Really appreciate you putting this together, and thanks to everyone for, learned a lot today. Thanks very much.
We'll just quickly close off this session, and I think we've sort of overshot the time that we had planned to overshoot as well. So thank you so much, Shambhi. Thank you so much, Nidhi, for spending time with us. And we really thank the audience for participating in this event as well.
Thank you, Balaji.
Thank you.